While signing the papers, my son said, "Don't read it all." His voice carried that hurried warmth people use when they want to nudge you past the details. But I've lived long enough to know that warmth can be a cover. My hand paused, pen hovering, as I glanced down at the pages spread before me. The air in the lawyer's office felt strangely dry, as though it carried a warning, and when my eyes caught line 12, I read it once, then again, as if the words might change with a second look. They didn't. They stood sharp, plain, and final, a transfer of full authority, not shared, not temporary, not reversible without his consent. My son's name where mine used to be. I didn't look up right away. I let the silence settle between us, my eyes fixed on that clause. For a moment I thought I must have misunderstood, that maybe legal language was tricking me, but the sting in my chest told me I hadn't. I whispered, almost to myself, "Why would you want this?" He shifted in his chair, leaning back as if casual comfort would soften the weight of what he'd asked me to surrender. "Mom, it's just easier this way," he said, his tone lined with reassurance but empty of explanation. The lawyer, a young man with thin spectacles and a tidy tie, cleared his throat politely. His face was neutral, professional, but I caught the flicker in his eyes that told me he knew I had stumbled upon something bigger than a routine form. I set the pen down gently, my fingers trembling only slightly. My son leaned forward, his hand covering mine. "Don't worry so much. It's standard. Just sign." That word, standard, echoed in me. I'd heard it before, years ago, when a bank clerk explained away a hidden fee, when a doctor minimized a procedure's risk, when my late husband promised me his business debts were nothing unusual. Standard has always meant don't ask questions. So I asked none. I didn't shout, didn't accuse. I only nodded, sliding the papers slightly away, pretending I needed more time to steady my hand. In truth, I needed more time to steady my heart. I saw then how age betrays you, not only in your knees or your eyesight, but in the quiet assumptions others make. They think you are too tired, too trusting, too eager to be guided. We left the office together, my son carrying the folder as if he were already its rightful owner. In the car, he talked of errands, of dinner plans, of nothing at all. His voice floated, easy, while my thoughts clung to that line 12 like burrs to wool. At a red light he reached over and squeezed my arm. "It's for your own good, Mom. Less stress." I smiled faintly, the way you smile when a stranger bumps into you and apologizes too quickly. Polite, hollow, unreturnable. My own son had placed me in the seat of a passenger, and I wasn't sure how long I'd been riding there without noticing. That night, when the house was quiet, I pulled out an old tin box from the cupboard above the fridge. In it were letters, receipts, photographs, bits of proof that my life had once been in my own hands. I held a faded picture of myself at 30, standing in the yard with my hair loose, my arms crossed, daring the world to underestimate me. I remembered that woman. She would have read every line before signing, she would have asked every question twice. Where had she gone? My son called me the next morning, cheerful, asking if I'd had breakfast. I told him yes, though the plate beside me was untouched. He reminded me about the forms, about bringing them back signed. His words were gentle but firm, the way you speak to a child reluctant to do her homework. I listened, agreeing softly, though inside I felt something grow, small, stubborn, but alive. I went for a walk after the call. The September air carried the first hints of autumn, crisp and tinged with smoke from distant fields. I passed neighbors who nodded politely, their dogs tugging at leashes. I thought of how ordinary it all seemed, how easily life presents a calm surface while beneath it storms churn. I wondered how many of them had handed over their choices, their names, their power, all for the sake of convenience or trust. At the small park bench under the birch tree, I sat and let the leaves scatter around my shoes. My son's words replayed, "Don't read it all." He had said it with such ease, as if he knew I would obey. That was what unsettled me most, not the papers, but his certainty that I wouldn't question. He believed my silence was guaranteed. I stayed on that bench until the sun dipped low, until the chill crept through my sweater. And in that quiet I decided one thing: I would not sign until I understood every line. The next week, I returned to the lawyer's office alone. He looked surprised, but polite, as I asked for a copy of the documents. "Of course," he said, though I saw the hesitation in his glance toward the empty doorway where my son wasn't. He printed them, slid them across the desk, and I tucked them into my bag with careful fingers. At home, I brewed a pot of tea, set the papers on the kitchen table, and began to read. Slowly, line by line, circling words I didn't know, writing questions in the margins. It took hours. When I reached line 12 again, the truth of it settled heavier than before: it wasn't protection. It was ownership. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Memories rose: my son at 5, clutching my hand at the school gate; my son at 15, shouting he hated me before slamming his door; my son at 25, calling me first when his marriage fell apart. Through all of it, I had been the one steady point. And now, at 58, I was being shifted from steady to dependent, not by strangers, but by him. The kettle clicked as it cooled, and I realized the tea had gone cold. I poured it down the sink, watching the brown swirl disappear. Something inside me whispered, "Don't disappear with it." For days I carried that copy with me, folded in my purse. At the grocery store, at the post office, at church on Sunday. The words weighed more than coins, more than keys. My son called again, and again I told him I was still looking it over. His patience thinned each time, though he tried to coat it with care. "Mom, you're overthinking. Just trust me." But trust, I realized, is not a blanket to be thrown over everything. It is a thread, woven daily, tested and repaired. And when you find it frayed, you don't pretend it's whole. One evening, after another call where his sighs pressed heavier than his words, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to him, not yet. To myself. I wrote, "I am not ready to give away what is still mine. I will not be hurried. I will not be silenced by kindness that hides control." When I finished, I folded the page and slipped it into the old tin box with the rest of my life's proofs. Then I closed the lid with a firm click, as if sealing an oath. I didn't know yet what my next step would be, but I knew this: I had begun to wake up. I didn't call my son for 3 days. I let the silence linger, like a closed door I wasn't ready to open. Normally, I would have been the one to reach out first, smoothing things over, asking how work was, reminding him to eat properly. That was my habit, my instinct, to mend before the tear widened. But this time, I let the fabric fray. I wanted to see what would happen when I stopped stitching. On the 4th morning, he came by unannounced. I heard his car in the driveway before I saw him at the door, his familiar knock echoing through the hall. I stood for a moment, my hand on the knob, studying myself. When I opened the door, he was smiling, too brightly. He held a paper bag, the smell of takeout food seeping through. "Thought you could use dinner," he said. We sat at the table where the documents had been spread just a week earlier. He unpacked the containers, arranging them as if this small gesture of care would fill the gap forming between us. I ate quietly, picking at the noodles, while he talked about work, about traffic, about the new neighbor's barking dog. I listened, nodding, but my mind circled the same question: does he know I've read it all? Finally, he leaned back and looked at me, his smile slipping. "Mom," he said carefully, "why haven't you signed yet?" His tone was gentle, but there was a tightness underneath, a thread of impatience. I set my fork down and met his eyes. "Because I still don't understand why you want me to." He sighed, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "It's just easier. I can handle the bills, the decisions, everything. You won't have to stress about it anymore. You can just relax." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that his motives were pure, that he was simply trying to protect me. But the words on line 12 didn't read like protection. They read like transfer. I shook my head slowly. "I don't need you to handle everything. Not yet." His jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked at me the way he used to when he was a teenager and I'd caught him lying about homework. Half defiant, half guilty. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Maybe it should be hard," I said quietly. The air between us thickened, the silence louder than any argument. He pushed his chair back suddenly, the legs scraping against the floor. "Fine. Take your time. But don't wait too long." He gathered the empty containers into the bag, his movements brisk, almost sharp. At the door he paused, his hand on the knob, his back still to me. "I just want what's best for you, Mom." Then he left without looking back. I sat there long after the sound of his car faded, the smell of soy sauce lingering in the air. His words echoed, "What's best for you?" But what if his idea of best was a life where I had no say at all? That night, I pulled out the documents again. My eyes burned from reading, but I forced myself to go through each line. I circled phrases I didn't understand, terms that sounded benign but carried weight. The next morning, I called the lawyer's office and asked if I could schedule a consultation, not with the young man from before, but with someone older, someone who had seen enough families to recognize when something was off. They gave me an appointment for Friday. In the meantime, I busied myself with the small routines that anchored me. I swept the porch, watered the plants, folded laundry. Each action felt heavier, as though the ordinary fabric of my days had been threaded with suspicion. I noticed how often my son called now, how he asked not just about my health but about whether I'd gone out, who I'd seen, what errands I'd run. His questions were cloaked in concern, but I felt the pull of a leash. On Thursday evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Collins, stopped by with a basket of apples from her tree. She's in her 70s, sharp-eyed, with a wit that cuts through pleasantries. As we peeled apples together in my kitchen, she noticed the papers spread on the counter. "Legal stuff?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I hesitated, then nodded. "My son wants me to sign over, well, most things." She set down her knife and gave me a look that was both stern and kind. "Don't you dare sign anything you don't understand. I've seen too many friends lose their say in their own lives because they trusted too quickly." Her words settled into me like stones in a pocket. Heavy, grounding. I realized then that part of my fear wasn't just about losing control, it was about being alone in it. About no one knowing what was happening except him. But Mrs. Collins knew now. And that made the burden feel just a little lighter. The next day, I walked into the lawyer's office with my folder under my arm. The older lawyer, a woman with silver hair pulled back neatly, welcomed me into her office. Her voice was calm, steady, without that rehearsed reassurance I'd heard before. I handed her the documents, my finger marking line 12. She read silently for a few minutes, her brow furrowing slightly. Then she looked up. "This clause gives your son complete authority over your financial and legal decisions. It's not temporary. It's not limited. It's what we call a durable power of attorney, but without any safeguards." The words confirmed what my heart already knew, but hearing them aloud made my stomach clench. "And if I sign?" I asked. "You would be giving him control that you could not easily take back. In some cases, not at all. It would mean trusting him absolutely." I sat very still. Trusting him absolutely. I thought of the way he said don't read it all. The way he sighed when I questioned him. The impatience in his voice when I delayed. My trust had always been wide, generous. But absolute? No. Not anymore. The lawyer leaned forward slightly. "If you want to protect yourself, you can set limits. You can decide what authority he has, and when. You don't have to give it all away." Her words were a lifeline. I clutched them tightly, nodding. "I'll think about it," I whispered. That night, I slept little. I kept turning over memories, trying to find the seam between love and control. I remembered the boy who held my hand on his first day of school, his palms sweaty with nerves. I remembered the young man who wept on my shoulder when his wife left him, his body shaking like a child's. I remembered the countless times he said, "I need you, Mom." Now it seemed he was saying, "You need me." And maybe he wanted to believe that, but the truth was murkier. By morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I would have to confront him, not with anger, but with clarity. I would have to tell him I had read every line, that I understood, that I would not sign without limits. I rehearsed the words as I brewed my coffee, as I folded laundry, as I watched the sparrows gather on the fence. But when the phone rang and his name lit up the screen, my throat tightened. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I sat down with a blank sheet of paper and wrote out what I wanted. Not what he wanted, not what was easier, but what was mine. I wrote, "I will accept help, but I will not surrender my voice. I will share decisions, but I will not be erased." When I finished, I read it aloud to the empty room. My voice trembled, but it was my own. The next step would come soon enough. I finally returned his call 2 days later. My voice felt strangely formal, almost rehearsed, as though I were speaking to a distant acquaintance rather than my own child. "I've been looking over the papers," I said. "We need to talk." There was a pause on his end, the kind that stretches longer than it should. "All right," he replied, his tone measured, cautious. "When?" "Tonight. Come for dinner." He arrived with a bottle of wine, the same brand he always brought on holidays, as though the gesture could make the evening festive, familiar. I had cooked a simple meal, chicken, potatoes, a salad, but I noticed how my hands trembled slightly as I set the dishes on the table. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what I knew was coming. We ate in silence at first. I watched him chew, watched him avoid my gaze, watched the lines around his mouth tighten each time I didn't fill the quiet with chatter. Normally, I would have asked about his day, about his coworkers, about the new project he'd mentioned last week. But tonight I gave him nothing to hide behind. Finally, he set his fork down with a clink. "So, the papers." "Yes," I said. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out my folded copy, laying it between us. "I've read them. All of them. Twice." His eyes flicked to the papers, then back to me. "And?" I took a deep breath. "I won't sign them as they are." His mouth tightened. "Mom." No, my voice surprised me. It was firm, steady, not the wavering tone I'd feared it would be. "I understand what line 12 means. I know what I'd be giving away. It's not protection. It's everything." He exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. "You're making this bigger than it is. Everyone does this. It's practical." "Practical for who?" I asked softly. His eyes hardened then, and for a moment I saw not my son but a man determined to have his way. "For both of us. I don't want you burdened with bills, with decisions. You don't need that stress. I can handle it." I shook my head. "I'm not ready to hand over my life like that. If you want to help, we'll do it with limits. Shared authority. Not complete control." The silence that followed felt like a crack spreading through glass. He stared at me, unblinking, his jaw tight. Then, slowly, he pushed his chair back and stood. "You don't trust me." The words landed heavy, but I didn't flinch. "I trust you with many things. But not with everything." His face twisted, a flash of something, hurt? Anger? Betrayal, before he masked it. "Fine. Do whatever you want." He grabbed his coat from the chair, muttering, "I was only trying to help." I watched him walk out, the door closing harder than he meant it to. The house echoed with the sudden emptiness, and I sat there, staring at the folded papers, my chest aching. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle the windows, thinking of how quickly love can turn brittle when tested. Was I being stubborn? Was he? Or had we both forgotten that help isn't about control, it's about respect? The next morning, I decided I needed air. I walked into town, past the bakery with its warm yeasty smell, past the bookstore where the owner always waved. At the cafe on the corner, I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching strangers move through their own quiet dramas. A young mother coaxing her toddler to sit still. An old man adjusting his hat with shaking hands. Life, in all its small negotiations. I pulled the papers from my bag again, spreading them on the table. A woman at the next table glanced at them, then at me. "Legal trouble?" she asked kindly. I almost brushed her off, but something in her tone was open, unassuming. "Family trouble," I admitted. She nodded as though she understood, and perhaps she did. There was comfort in that small exchange, in the reminder that what felt overwhelming to me was part of a larger human story, the tug-of-war between independence and care, between trust and fear. When I returned home, I found a message on my phone. My son's voice, tight but trying to sound calm. "I'm sorry if I pushed too hard. Maybe we can talk again. Just think about it, okay?" I listened twice. The first time I felt the sting of guilt, the pull to smooth things over. The second time I noticed the weariness in his voice, the threat of desperation. Maybe he truly believed he was helping. Or maybe he believed help required control. I wasn't sure which was worse. That evening, I sat with the tin box again, the one filled with my life's proofs. I pulled out an old letter my husband had written me when we were newly married. His handwriting was bold, confident, the words full of promises we both believed then. "We'll build everything together. Always together. Together." That was the word missing now. My son spoke of taking over, of relieving me, of making things easier. But he never spoke of together. I realized then that my fight wasn't against him. It was against the quiet erasure of my voice. Against the easy slide into invisibility. The next day, I called the older lawyer. "I want to draft a new version," I told her. "One that sets limits. One that says I share decisions, not surrender them." She agreed readily, her voice steady, encouraging. "That's wise. It gives you both clarity." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. I wasn't just resisting. I was creating. I was shaping the terms of my own life. Still, when I thought of telling my son, my stomach knotted. Would he see it as compromise, or as defiance? Would he walk away again, or would he sit and listen? The days passed slowly, each one tinged with the weight of waiting. I busied myself with small acts of care, baking bread, sewing a loose button, writing letters I never sent. Each action reminded me that I was still capable, still present. One afternoon, Mrs. Collins stopped by again, this time with a pie. We sat on the porch, eating slices warm from the oven. I told her what I had done, how I had asked for limits to be written in. She smiled, her eyes sharp and proud. "That's strength," she said. "Not letting anyone, family or not, take away your say." Her words steadied me. I realized I wasn't alone, not entirely. I had voices around me reminding me of who I was, even when my own son seemed to forget. That night, as I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end of the story. This is me learning how to stand again." The revised papers were ready within a week. The lawyer had been careful, deliberate, drafting terms that gave my son the authority to help me manage specific matters, paying bills if I asked, signing routine documents when I was unwell, but the final say remained mine. The power shifted not as a surrender, but as a partnership. When I held the new version in my hands, I felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in a long time: ownership. I knew showing it to him would be the real test. He was used to me agreeing, to me smoothing things over, to me trusting without question. I had to prepare myself for his reaction, whatever it might be. I called him on a Tuesday evening. My voice was calm, though my hands gripped the phone tight. I need you to come by. Tomorrow night. There's something we need to discuss. Is this about the papers again? His tone was cautious, guarded. Yes, I said simply. He sighed into the receiver. All right. I'll be there. The next day was heavy with anticipation. I busied myself with small chores, but everything I did felt weighted. I swept the kitchen floor twice. I rearranged the books on the shelf. I checked the clock so often it seemed to tick slower in defiance. When dusk finally fell, I lit a small lamp in the living room, its warm glow steady against the creeping dark. He arrived right on time, his knock sharp, quick. When I opened the door, he looked tired, eyes shadowed, tie loosened, the weight of his workday still clinging to him. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around as if expecting to see the old papers on the table again. I gestured to the armchair. Sit. He sank into it, his shoulders tense, his fingers drumming against his knee. So, what's this about? I placed the new documents on the coffee table between us. I had another version drawn up. One that protects both of us. His brow furrowed. Another version? Yes. This one gives you the ability to help, but not to control. You can step in when I need it, but not take over everything. It's shared. Not surrendered. He leaned forward, picking up the pages, scanning them quickly. His jaw tightened as he read. This isn't what I asked for. No, I said softly, it's what I need. His eyes flicked up to mine, sharp, almost accusing. You don't trust me. I trust you with many things, I said carefully. But I also trust myself. That's the part you keep forgetting. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick, heavy with unsaid things. He set the papers down abruptly, his hand pressing against them as if to keep them from sliding away. You're making this complicated. Life is complicated, I replied. Trust is complicated. Family is complicated. This, I tapped the papers gently, this is clarity. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the window where the night pressed in. You think I'm trying to control you. I think you're trying to simplify me, I said. Turn me into someone who needs managing instead of someone who still has a voice. His mouth opened, then closed. I could see the war inside him, the tug between intention and pride. Finally, he whispered, I just don't want to lose you. The words cut through me. For a moment, all my resolve softened, and I saw not the man in front of me but the boy he once was, the boy who clung to my hand, who feared being left behind. My heart ached with the weight of his fear, but I also knew fear could not be the foundation for this kind of decision. You won't lose me, I said gently. Unless you try to take me away from myself. He pressed his hands to his face, rubbing his eyes. His voice was muffled when he spoke. You don't understand. I see people at work, older, confused, taken advantage of. I don't want that for you. I'm not them, I said firmly. Not yet. Maybe one day, yes, I'll need more. And when that time comes, we'll face it together. But right now, I am still here. I can still choose. He looked at me then, really looked, as though seeing me for the first time in years. His eyes softened, though his shoulders stayed tense. And if I say no? If I refuse this version? Then I sign nothing, I answered. My voice did not waver. The silence that followed was long, stretching between us like a tightrope. He could either cross it toward me or turn away. Finally, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. You've always been stubborn. I smiled faintly. It's kept me alive this long. He chuckled once, though it was a hollow sound. He picked up the papers again, flipping through them more carefully this time. All right. I'll look at this. No promises. That's all I ask, I said. When he left that night, he didn't slam the door. He didn't storm out. He carried the new documents under his arm, his steps slower than usual. I watched him go, my heart both heavy and light. Heavy with the weight of what might still fracture between us, light with the knowledge that I had spoken my truth. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet house. The lamp still glowed, casting shadows against the walls. I thought of my husband's letter again, of the word together. Maybe my son and I could still find our way back to that. Or maybe not. But at least I had drawn my line. At least I had said, this far, no further. The days that followed were uneasy. He called less often, his voice cooler when he did. But he didn't push. He didn't demand. And for the first time in weeks, I felt I could breathe again. I walked each morning, breathing in the crisp autumn air, watching the leaves scatter across the sidewalks. The world felt both fragile and resilient, much like myself. One morning, at the park bench under the birch tree, I saw a father holding his daughter's hand as she climbed the steps of the playground. She was small, her pigtails swinging, her laughter ringing clear. The father hovered, protective, ready to catch her if she slipped, but not holding her back. He let her climb. I watched them for a long time, thinking, that's what care should look like. Ready to catch, but not clipping wings. That night, I wrote another letter to myself. I have spoken. I have been heard. Whether he accepts it or not, I remain whole. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the tin box with the rest. I didn't know what would come next. But for the first time since line 12, I felt steady in my own skin. The first frost came early that year. I woke one morning to find the garden silvered over, each blade of grass stiff with ice. When I stepped outside, my breath curled into the air, visible, fleeting. It reminded me that life is like that too, seen clearly for a moment, then dissolving into something unseen but still present. I had not heard from my son in almost 2 weeks. Not a call, not a visit. At first I told myself he was busy, that his silence was nothing unusual. But I knew better. The distance was deliberate, a kind of punishment. He had always known how to withhold affection when he felt challenged, and I had always been the one to bridge the gap. This time, I refused. Instead, I poured myself into the small rhythms of my days. I baked bread, kneading the dough until my arms ached, letting the smell fill the house. I visited the library and borrowed novels, losing myself in other people's worlds for a few hours at a time. I even started attending a weekly knitting group at the church, something I'd always avoided, thinking it too trivial. But there, among women my age, I found laughter and stories that reminded me I wasn't alone. One afternoon after knitting, Mrs. Collins walked me home. She carried her cane with a kind of defiance, as though it were not a weakness but a weapon. "You seem lighter these days," she remarked, her sharp eyes on me. I smiled. "I suppose I've stopped waiting for someone else to make me feel steady." She nodded, approving. "That's the secret, you know. The steadiness has to start inside. Otherwise, anyone can take it from you." Her words stayed with me. For years, I had built my steadiness around my son, his happiness, his approval, his needs. Perhaps I had done him no favors by letting him believe my life revolved around his. Perhaps my resistance now was not only for me, but for him too. A few days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew his handwriting immediately. Inside was a short letter, written in rushed strokes. "Mom. I don't know how to say this without sounding harsh. I'm scared for you. I've seen too many people lose themselves. I don't want to watch that happen to you. Maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I should have explained better. But please, please understand, I'm not trying to take your life from you. I'm trying to make sure you're safe. Love. David. I read it 3 times, my eyes catching on the word safe. It struck me then how fear had driven both of us, his fear of losing me, my fear of losing myself. And between those fears we had built a wall neither of us knew how to climb. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the tin box, then sat for a long time in silence. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that his intentions were as pure as his words. But intentions could not erase the clause I had read, nor the way he had dismissed my voice. That evening, I picked up the phone and called him. His voice was surprised, guarded. "Mom? I got your letter," I said. "Thank you for writing it." A pause. "You believe me?" "I believe you care," I answered. "But caring doesn't mean control. If you want me safe, then you also have to want me free." The line was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, he said, "I don't know how to balance that." "That's because balance is harder than control," I said gently. "But it's worth learning." He sighed, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was weary, softened by honesty. "Maybe I need to try again." "Maybe we both do," I replied. We agreed to meet for lunch that weekend. On Saturday, I chose a small cafe in town, one with bright windows and simple food. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window, his hands folded tightly around a mug of coffee. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, waiting for me at the school gate, nervous but eager. We talked cautiously at first, circling around safe topics, the weather, his work, the cafe's new menu. But eventually, the silence between us demanded truth. "I read your letter," I said again, my voice steady. "And I know you mean well. But meaning well doesn't erase what you asked me to do." He looked down at his hands. "I know. I shouldn't have told you not to read it all. That was wrong." Hearing him admit it loosened something in me, a knot I hadn't realized was so tight. "I don't want us to be at odds," I said softly. "But if we are to move forward, it has to be together. I won't sign away my voice. Not now. Not while I still have it." He looked up, his eyes damp, though he blinked quickly to hide it. "I don't want to take your voice. I wanted to make sure you'd always be okay. You make me okay by walking beside me, not in front of me," I said. We sat in silence then, letting the words settle. The cafe bustled around us, cups clinking, conversations humming, but for a moment it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. Finally, he reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Show me the new papers," he said quietly. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I will." When I left the cafe, the air felt different, lighter, though the sky was gray with approaching rain. I walked slowly, savoring the small victory. It wasn't resolution, not yet. But it was a step toward it. That night, I wrote again in my notebook, "Love is not silence. Love is not surrender. Love is the space where two voices meet and neither is erased." I closed the book, placed it in the tin box, and for the first time in many weeks, I slept without waking. The rain fell steadily the following morning, soft and unhurried, tapping against the kitchen window as I stood with my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. I watched the drops gather and slide down the glass, tracing their own unpredictable paths. It struck me how life worked the same way, never a straight line, always some diversion, a pause, a redirection. My son and I had taken our diversions too, and yet, somehow, the path still wound back toward one another. I pulled the tin box from the cupboard and laid it on the table. Inside sat the notebooks, the letters, the folded copy of the papers I had been asked not to read. They no longer felt like threats. They felt like proof of where I had been, what I had seen, and the choices I had made. Proof that I had not disappeared into silence. By noon, David arrived. He stood on the porch, dripping from the rain, holding a folder under his arm. His expression was careful, respectful. For the first time in weeks, I did not brace myself. I simply opened the door and let him in. "I brought something," he said, setting the folder on the table. He looked almost like a boy again, caught between guilt and hope. I dried his coat with a towel, then nodded to the folder. "Go on, then." He opened it slowly, as though giving me time. Inside were freshly printed documents, but these were not the ones I had seen before. These were different, simpler, clearer. He slid them toward me. I spoke with another attorney. I told him I wanted something that protects you if you need it, but doesn't silence you if you don't. He helped me draft this version. Nothing takes effect unless you say so, and everything has to be explained aloud, in the room, before any signature is binding. I ran my fingers over the papers, reading carefully this time. No hidden clauses, no quiet betrayals. Line 12 was blank, intentionally so. I smiled faintly. "You left space." He nodded. "For your words, not mine." We sat together, going through each page, my voice steady as I read. Sometimes I asked questions, sometimes I paused to think, and each time he waited without rushing me. It was such a small thing, his patience, but it felt like a door opening where before there had been only a wall. When we finished, I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. "This," I said, tapping it lightly, "is something I can live with. Because it lets me live, fully, until the very end." Relief flickered across his face, so plain and unguarded that I almost reached out to hug him then and there. But I held back, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted the space to linger between us, not empty, but respected. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Mom. For before. For trying to manage you instead of listening to you." I let the words rest in the air for a moment. Then I said softly, "And I'm sorry too. For letting you think my silence was agreement all those years. I should have spoken up sooner." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming steadily against the house. We sat in its rhythm, both of us quieter than before, but not distant. Later, after he left, I walked into the garden. The frost had melted, the soil dark and damp, the last of the roses bending under the weight of the rain. I touched one lightly, petals cool against my skin, and thought of all the seasons I had lived through, all the times I had bent and then lifted again. That night, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Today my son gave me back what I never should have had to fight for, my say in my own story." Perhaps this is how love grows, not by avoiding the wound, but by mending it, thread by thread. Weeks passed, and with them came small signs of change. David began calling, not with instructions, but with questions. "How are you feeling today, Mom? What do you want to do this weekend?" Sometimes he stopped by with groceries, sometimes just for tea. We argued still, about trivial things, about bigger things, but there was a difference now. He argued with me, not over me. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room, he glanced at the tin box on the table. "You've kept all of it, haven't you?" "I have," I said. "Even the old papers?" "Yes. Especially those. They remind me of what I almost gave away." He was quiet, then asked, "And what will you do with it all someday?" I smiled, closing the lid gently. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I'll leave it for you to find when I'm gone. A reminder that your mother was more than the papers she signed. She was a woman who read line 12 twice, and then chose her own ending." He laughed softly, though his eyes glistened. "You've always had the last word, haven't you?" "Not always," I admitted. "But I've learned to take it back when it matters." And there it was, the truth of it all. For years, I had believed love was endurance, that keeping peace meant keeping quiet. But silence had nearly cost me myself. It was only in speaking, in refusing to let my voice be buried, that I found not just protection, but connection. The frost came again by late November, harder this time, the garden stripped bare. But I no longer feared the stillness. I knew spring would return, as it always had, as it always would. One evening, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on, their glow spreading across the wet pavement. I thought of the long path behind me, of the boy who had grown into a man, of the woman who had nearly lost her name in the fine print. I thought of how close we had come to letting fear win. And I whispered, to no one but myself, not yet. Not today. My voice is still here. The words filled the quiet room, not loud, not defiant, but steady. And that steadiness, at last, belonged to me. I was not saved by the papers I signed, nor by the ones I refused, but by the choice to keep reading, to keep speaking, until the very end.